Consider this. Contrary to popular belief, our ancestors, and by this I mean wild, primitive, hunter-gatherer humans, were incredibly healthy, lean, strong, and free of chronic diseases. Not to say they didn't have their own acute challenges, like getting wet and cold, or going hungry, or dealing with predators, and so on, but they did not suffer from the chronic diseases that are plaguing our societies today. Now, they weren't healthier than us because they had more scientific knowledge or better healthcare. They enjoyed better overall health for one simple reason. They lived in alignment with their biological needs in an environment that supported rather than sabotaged their health. Nowadays, despite all our medical advances, we've seen an unprecedented rise in chronic disease. And this is not just better diagnosis. These diseases have appeared recently and are now at epidemic proportions. But here's the empowering truth. Your body hasn't forgotten how to be healthy. Your genes are not hardwired to work against you. Your body is simply waiting for the right inputs to experience a health-promoting environment. You would be amazed to see the result of changing some of these variables, to effectively get out of our own way, to give our bodies what they need, and to let our physiology and our genes self-correct, to build health and function, and to keep it long into our older years. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. We're living longer than ever. How can you say that our ancestors were healthier? Fair question. As you can see from this graph here, life expectancy has more than doubled since 1900. But let's take a look at why. Most people give all the credit to this increase in lifespan to modern medicine. But the biggest gains actually came from environmental changes. Sanitation, clean water, refrigeration, better nutrition, workplace health and safety, along with, yes, better medical care. We've also got to consider the way that these statistics are skewed by deaths in infancy and in early adulthood due to wars, famines, etc. But quite simply, we cleaned up our environment and fewer people died when they were young. And these were real wins for public health. But it's important that we understand what actually caused and contributed to these improvements, because it really does change how we think about health. Before we pat ourselves on the back here, let's add some valuable context. Quote, "A common misinterpretation is to assume that few hunter-gatherers live to older ages. Adult survivorship is similar to industrialized societies, with adults regularly living into their 60s and 70s and even beyond. Old age is not a recent phenomenon, hypothesized to be an evolutionarily derived feature of human life history driven by selection for grandparental investment." Think about what this means. We're not exceeding our biological potential, which is probably somewhere around 100 to 120 years. We've just returned to a normal human lifespan after centuries of wars, famines, oppression, and infectious diseases. We removed many of the obstacles that killed people while they were young, but now the question is, are we actually healthy during all these years? Here's the short answer: no. On average, yes, we're living longer than people from 100 years ago, but we're also spending many of those extra years in varying states of ill health. Chronic disease has increased by 700% since 1936 in the US alone. Heart disease, cancer, immune disease, neurological disease, digestive disease, kidney disease, liver disease, infertility. This is not better diagnosis. This is a catastrophe. While this has become the norm in the modern world, I don't believe this level of disease is normal for the human animal. For every 3 adults you meet in the US, UK, and Australia, 2 of them will be overweight or obese. In children, it's about 1 in 4. And even though the Western nations lead the way here, even places like Japan have not been immune to sharp increases in obesity. Something is going seriously wrong, and it's not just about calories. And this is an important data point because body composition is a reliable indicator of health, especially metabolic health. It's not a question of aesthetics. Despite our deep knowledge of exercise science and the abundance of fitness equipment, gadgets, and apps, the average Westerner now has poorer cardiovascular fitness than someone from a traditional culture who doesn't even wear shoes. Just like being overweight, being unfit dramatically increases our risk of chronic disease. This one is particularly wild. Diabetes has actually been known since ancient times, but it was always very rare. In the US, it's increased by 1,400% since 1958. That's crazy. My grandma had diabetes and severe arthritis, and what breaks my heart is that it didn't have to be that way. She listened to her doctors, she took her medications, she dieted, and nothing helped. I remember visiting her in hospital and seeing all the junk food they were feeding her. Feeding junk food to someone with diabetes, then dosing them up with pills to suppress the symptoms instead of actually fixing the problem? This might be the standard of care, but I believe this is unacceptable. While aging is inevitable, this decline in our quality of life is largely avoidable. Just take a look at the scale of the problem. In the US alone, we spend $4 trillion a year on healthcare, and 90% of that budget goes towards managing chronic conditions, which are largely preventable. But the mainstream medical model is simply the wrong tool for the job here. Modern allopathic medicine is exceptional at acute care, trauma, emergencies, etc. But when it comes to chronic disease, it has failed. It is only able to treat symptoms and not address the root cause. And that's largely by design. In the early 1900s, medical education was restructured to focus almost exclusively on pharmaceutical and surgical interventions. Nutrition, exercise, and the schools of natural and lifestyle medicine, they were pushed to the margins. So we ended up with a system that's brilliant at keeping you alive, but has no framework for keeping you healthy. So in the end, while we call it a healthcare system, it's really a disease management system. Building health requires different tools. And until we recognize that it's our environment, not the faulty genes driving this epidemic, the numbers will keep climbing. Now, many health professionals actually saw this coming. And one of the best examples here comes from a dentist who documented some very important clues about 100 years ago. It's often claimed that our ancestors had terrible dental health. This is categorically false. Teeth are bones. They preserve really well. So we actually have excellent evidence here. And in the early 1900s, a dentist named Weston A noticed something curious. The children of recent immigrants often had healthy teeth, while their American-born siblings showed decay. This launched him on a decades-long journey studying isolated populations, still eating their traditional diets. What he discovered was some very simple but powerful lessons about nutrition and health. Here's a snapshot of what he found. The people eating their ancestral foods had near perfect dental health. Beautiful straight teeth, virtually no cavities, symmetrical faces, and strong jaws. But within one generation of adopting Western foods, what he called the foods of modern commerce, the people showed dramatic increases in tooth decay, crowded teeth, and narrowed dental arches. Same genetics, different environmental input, completely different outcome. And this wasn't about superior healthcare or better dental hygiene. These populations didn't have any dental or medical care. They didn't have fluoride in their water. No toothbrushes, no toothpastes, no mouthwashes. The key difference was the food. On average, Price found that traditional diets contained 4 to 10 times more vitamins and minerals than the modern US diet, and this gap has only increased. Thanks to Dr. Price, now we know nutrient deficiencies are common in Western nations, and these deficiencies are passed on to our offspring. A lack of adequate nutrients is a major cause of birth defects, poor immune function, and many different types of chronic disease. This pattern held true everywhere Price traveled, from North American Indians to African populations to Australian Aborigines to Pacific Islanders. The same pattern everywhere he went. If you want to learn more about this, go read his book. It's excellent. You can learn more about the other groups he visited, like the Swiss, the Gaelics, the Inuit, the Melanesians, Peruvian Indians, and many others.